Hello friends, for today's video we're going to be looking at episodes 4 through 6 of Arcane Season 1. With the deep dive for episodes 1 through 3, I was definitely more so going through things chronologically and then extrapolating important themes through specific scenes. And with this batch of episodes, I feel a lot of the themes are actually having a tether that connects them through various scenes throughout these 3 episodes. So I'm going to structure this a little bit more by talking more broadly and then zeroing in on the things that relate to those broader themes. 2 characters that really represent a lot of what is going to be touched on would be Jace and Silco. I don't really see necessarily these 2 characters as opposites of one another. I think in a lot of ways we see there being parallels between Vander and Vi and Silco, and at this point I can officially refer to her as Jinx. I didn't want to spoil for anybody who had only watched the first 3 episodes from last week, but we can officially call her Jinx. I think we definitely see parallels with those characters, but I don't really see too many people looking at the differences and similarities between Jace and Silco because they feel so drastically different from one another, but they are both products of the society that they grew up within. In some ways, I feel they are both reaching for an ideal, just how they go about it is very different. So in Jace's scenario, I think he is somebody who he wants what's best for everybody. He has very pure intentions. I don't know that he's the most specific with how he gets to where he wants to be or he wants society to be, but he has these lofty goals. And then Silco simultaneously wants Zaun, as he calls the Undercity. He wants it to have progress. He sees the way in which Hextech has allowed for there to be progress with Piltover, but he views Zaun as falling even further behind. I definitely think a lot of stories that touch on any kind of industrial revolution or there being some kind of turn of the century type of setup, I think that it is almost important to include this idea of initially the people who benefit the most aren't the people who need help the most. It's sort of the rich get richer and everybody else's lives for the most part just stay the same. It's just whoever's in power slightly shifts hands. And I think Arcane does a really fantastic job of addressing this. You see it through the vocalization that he has, meaning Silco. But Jace is just like, oh yeah, progress. Look at how great everything is now. And what I think really defines the differences between Jace and Silco is that Jace is always looking at what is right in front of him. And he doesn't always think about the ways in which whatever decision he's making in the here and now, what the lasting effects of those things are going to be, which is why he's so easily manipulated, which you see time and time again, and why it comes across like he flip-flops. I don't think he's somebody who is a grifter or something. I don't think he's someone who is constantly shifting his views because he's just trying to get the most out of every situation from this malicious place. I think he genuinely is just like, what's the right decision right now? And he doesn't necessarily think ahead. Whereas Silco has the big picture pretty much exclusively. It's not to say he's not meticulous. I think he pays attention to the details. But for him, if there is a decision that is difficult for someone like a Jace, where you're sort of in this moral conundrum of, well, this would cause a negative impact right now, but maybe in the long run it would be good. Silco, I don't think even bats an eye. He's like, well, if this needs to happen for what he views as the greater good, which is a better society for Zaun, that is the decision that he is going to go with because it's what gets him to his ideal. And I think in structuring their characters in this way makes them both feel very realistic, but also just shows the way in which they could not probably exist very well in each other's situations. They're both products of their society. Jace has the ability to only think about the here and now because, as we sort of discussed in the deep dive for the first few episodes, there aren't necessarily intense consequences to him making a mistake. You do see the intense consequences that people from the Undercity face, which you see with Vi, who has her comeback within the end of episode 4, but we'll get to those characters later. I still want to focus here on Silco and Jace. But one example of Jace not really looking in the long run, and it's such an understated thing, but it's once again a tether between these 2 characters, is Jace, in doing this demonstration for Heimerdinger, is telling him, look at the technology that we can improve, and this is definitely going to make people's lives better, especially the people who need it the most. Once again, good intentions. And he specifically states with the technology that he is showing Heimerdinger that it's going to help people in the mines. Later, in another episode, you see Silco saying, do you remember what it was like to be in the mines? And he's specifically referring to the air that they had to breathe. And the air within all of Zon, as we see with the Enforcers wearing masks, does not seem to create the healthiest of environments. We also see that Victor is dying. He's somebody from the Undercity, and he was directly impacted by his environment. But in a way, the idea that we can make people that work within the mines, we can make their work more efficient, I'm sure he sees it as a plus, because then it would allow people to potentially make more money for themselves, and if they can make more for themselves, then they can have more. But when you have that stark contrast to hearing about how suffocating the conditions are in the mines, once again, these are almost throwaway lines, but when you really look at them through these characters' eyes, you realize how much they truly do represent both the Undercity and Piltover. Jace does have a number of other interactions with other members of our ensemble cast, one of whom would be Caitlin. We get a little bit more of Caitlin this time around. We didn't see her too much within the first 3 episodes. And one thing I want to compliment about Jace, and once again, it ties back to his good intentions, is that he immediately, when he is given a position on the council, tries to do what he can for his friend, Caitlin, tries to help her get a job because her parents pulled some strings. They don't want her anywhere near danger. And I think that Caitlin's character is one that pride is definitely evident, but you can absolutely understand why, because she feels this constant need to prove herself. You see this with the flashback with her mentor, Grayson, where she is very upset at the idea that Grayson let her win, and she's wondering, did my parents pay you off? Did they make it so that I would get this? And Grayson's like, I think you deserved it. And she's somebody who constantly feels the need to prove herself and prove that she deserves to be where she is. And so her rejection of Jace's offer, on one hand, it does seem a little foolish, but on the other hand, you can completely understand why, based off of how she has grown up. Her mother does also definitely pull a lot of strings, and I feel that one scene in particular that really stands out is within Happy Progress Day, where Jace is going to make his big announcement for what Hex Tech has coming, and he has this decision he has to make. Does he go with the plan that him and Victor decided on, or does he take the safe route that Heimerdinger recommended? And he's looking out into the crowd, and he sees what are basically like his investors, and money talks a lot within the council and within the upper city. So he is having to have this on-the-fly decision, and he ultimately goes with what he sees as the safe choice, which obviously not only Mel dislikes, but you see that Caitlin's mother is not in favor of this either, but Jay sort of just goes along with the moment until he can figure things out later. But one thing that I think is notable about this scene is, once again, this really proves how much Jace makes decisions based off of the exact feeling he has in that moment, is ahead of time, because he really rejected Heimerdinger rejecting their technology and saying, no, you need to improve this, and we need another at least 10 years, or whatever amount of time that Heimerdinger lays out as an option. And Jace feels this is unacceptable, and he comes to this decision in part because of Victor and the work that they've put in together. And it's clear based off of how the scene plays out that Victor very much was thinking that Jace was going to not go along with the advice that Heimerdinger gave, and that Jace was going to go with their plan. And I really think that it's not just that Jace changed his mind that evening, or Jace changed his mind shortly before. He changes his mind when he's on stage in front of everyone, because you even see him trying to get Victor to come up with him. He's like, oh, it's your work as much as it is mine. But imagine if Victor had gone up on stage with him, and then Jace changed his mind last second. Victor, who already prefers to sort of keep to the lab, we'll say, doesn't really want to be up in front of everybody. If he had had the inability to have a natural reaction to Jace sort of going back on their plan, because he'd been brought out in front of everybody, and then Jace just all of a sudden changes his mind, I would have felt so bad for Victor. I mean, you already feel a little bit bad for him because Jace just changes his mind and goes with it, and it does kind of show that there's a bit almost of a power dynamic, even though they're meant to be partners in their work. Jace kind of gets to make most of the big decisions, and then Victor is somewhat left in the shadows. I think even the positioning of that scene where he is sort of backstage and you see Jace on stage getting all the recognition, and Jace does try, but again, the idea that he, even as he was trying to convince Victor to come on stage with him, and then he changes his mind right after that, it just goes to show how much Jace, when he sees people that are there right in front of him, doesn't know ahead of time until he's in the moment. Within this scene, there's one additional thing I want to mention, which is a specific quote that Jace has. He says, "No one in my life expected much from me, and that is precisely what makes this moment so extraordinary." This centering of himself, he does still sort of see what's happening as part of his story. What's happening is not extraordinary because no one expected anything of him. What's happening is extraordinary because of the work that him and Victor have put in and the progress they were able to make as a result, not just of their work, but a lot of other individuals being a part of this. Yes, some people are trying to just merely profit off of it. It could be used in ways that actually truly meet the vision of helping people from the Undercity, but the way in which it's just, this is great because no one expected anything of me, it's not the best look. It absolutely is making it about himself as opposed to making it about the progress for everyone and moving forward collectively. And I think that has so many implications. Once again, the very title being Happy Progress Day, progress for him, progress for the Upper City, progress for everyone, progress for Zahn. It's especially funny too, given that he wasn't even the person originally who was going to make the speech. And part of me thinks maybe he should have been kept off and had someone else make the speech, because if somebody else had made the speech, it wouldn't be about like, this is extraordinary because no one expected anything of Jace. It would have been, this is extraordinary because there's so much more that we have to offer and so much more we can do for the sake of improving people's lives. I promise I'm not going to spend the entirety of this just analyzing Jace to pieces, but I do think that a lot of Jace's movement within these episodes says a lot about other characters as well, and one of them would be Mel. You see how she's trying to sort of shape and mold and craft him into somebody who can be used, which is not a difficult thing to do, sadly. But we already see her doing this as she is pushing and encouraging that Jace be given a place on the council. He doesn't necessarily resist that much. He definitely seems surprised, but he just sort of goes with it. And then he does not really decide this is a negative until Mel goes up to him and says, "What have you done? You immediately started trying to make decisions left and right. You're shaking things up," which is her failure to realize that that's what Jace does constantly. As soon as he's given some kind of any position of authority or any kind of power, he immediately tries to do something with it. Mel is sort of chastising him, and he immediately is like, "You pushed me into this," instead of taking any recognition. He could have said no, he could have turned it down, he could have said, no, I just want to stick, I don't know, I'm not qualified, which, hey, what a concept, the idea of somebody not being qualified, being given a position of power, when does that ever happen? He had some agency, he chose to go ahead and be a member of the council, then he chose to do things with it, and then when he finds out there are negative consequences of this, he immediately goes to blaming Mel. This is somewhat of a pattern for him of pushing back as soon as there is a negative consequence and finding someone else to blame. I mean, he kind of did that with his own mother after she tried to defend him in the first set of episodes. But regardless, Mel in this moment is trying to advise him and trying to teach him how to play the game. And this is, I think, a perfect example of, one, how good Mel is at convincing people and reading people. We already got hints of it within the first 3 episodes when she knows, let me buy this child's toy so that the one councilman will be distracted, and she knows how to play people. She definitely lays out for Jace and gives him all of the details of what's going to convince people and what's going to get them off his back. But you also see very quickly that Jace immediately is like, oh, okay, and then he starts rubbing elbows.
I never wanted anything to do with politics. You pushed this on me.
Tech partners.
Has a nice ring, doesn't it?
He does the very thing that he's convinced the council of doing that is a bad thing. At least in his mind, it's morally unjust. He feels they've definitely indulged in corruption. They've looked the other way. This is the whole reason that there are problems with Zahn. And then he goes right immediately to doing that because in the moment, that is, for him, the solution. That's the right thing, quote unquote, to do right then and there. And he doesn't really ask himself, is this just going to continue the pattern that has been established? And is this going to continue all of the unfairness that is placed on the people of Zahn? We've spent quite a bit of time on Jace, so we'll go ahead and segue to a different character now, and we'll spend some time with Jinx. Obviously, there is an enormous difference between how she was when we last saw her and how she is now, at least outwardly.
Sisters, right? Can't live with them, can't stuff them back in the old baby maker.
You're very much seeing the ways in which her trauma has affected her, but simultaneously, I do feel that same little girl who just craves approval and just wants to belong, we still see that within her. It almost feels out of place now, though, because you do see, and I think this is a great physical representation of how uncomfortable this juxtaposition is that when she is interacting with Silco, the way she is around him is very much like a child much younger than she is, and it looks very strange. And then you see her, even in how she talks about things and how she looks at situations around her and how she speaks to other people, she's still somewhat within this childlike headspace. And it's almost as if what she had happened to her when she was young has not allowed her to escape that moment. She is somewhat trapped in it. You also see how she still continuously talks to these people that were her friends. She continues to see them, and it's like she can't escape that moment. Another great example of the way in which Jinx is somewhat stuck in the past is the scene where you go back to their hideout and there's the games that they would play. Specifically, Vi had the boxing game, and you see Jinx obviously is very good herself at this point, but she's still not quite as good as Vi. It's not just that she wants to prove herself, it's that she also is constantly comparing herself to Vi. There was that quote where she overheard Milo telling her sister, well, you were already so much more of a person than she is at her age. Not only does she want to prove her worth, but she wants to prove that she is just as good as her sister, and to fall short of that physically within this game, but also in her own mind, it really negatively affects her. On top of that, the way that the scene plays out, where you see her, she's not just focused, locked in, and engaging with this, but she also is having these flickers of her sister in that moment, and it's sort of going back and forth between her and Vi. It just reinforces the idea that there is a time that she is partially still within. Expanding a little bit more on the idea that she is still just craving approval, so much of what transpires throughout the entirety, I think, thematically of this show is people doing what they think is right for other human beings. I touched obviously quite a bit on how Jace goes about it, a little bit on how Silco goes about it. You even see Vi and Vander within the first 3 episodes asking themselves, what's the right thing to do? How do we make life better for everybody around us? I want Powder to have a better life than me. You see things like that vocalized by Vi. And then you see someone like Caitlyn, who's very by the books, and then she's going a little rogue for once, and then she's trying to get to the bottom of things, and her means of doing that is to truly get to the bottom of things, a little bit different than Jace here, but ultimately everybody's trying to do what they think is right in the long run. Where I think Jinx stands out is that while she ends up being a vehicle for Silco's cause, at the end of the day, I think you could argue she doesn't really care. You don't really see her talking about how unfair it is that everybody in Zahn is treated this way. People in the Undercity, nobody even looks at us as people. You don't really see her having that same kind of language the way you see from other characters from the Undercity. Instead, she has more of this approach of, I'm going to show them, and like she's continuously just trying to do exactly what she was trying to do when she was a little girl. And I think the very opening of this batch of episodes where you see there being this deal with Shimmer, and you have Savika there, as well as some of Silco's other underlings. And then Jinx also is present. You also get the introduction of the Firelights, and you can see there are some people that are going against Silco's reign, we'll call it. I don't think she cares whatsoever about the Prophet. I don't think she cares about making a statement. I think she ultimately is just trying to show, hey, I can belong, I can do my job, I can be a part of the crew, and I can do it better than everybody else. I'm not actually going to deter anything from getting accomplished. It's ultimately really sad because you see Savika put into words, I think, really well and in a really cutting way. And I say really well not because I support this, but just because she reads, I think, Jinx for where she is. And she says to her, "You're as good for our cause as you were for your family," which is ultimately the most awful thing, really, that you can say to her in this moment, because there is a very deep-seated guilt, but it's not something I feel that she's ready to confront. And ultimately, it's not that she did anything intentionally, but if she actually digs deep and recognizes that her actions, her attempts to prove that she has value resulted in something so terrible that she doesn't even want to confront it. If she were to do that, I think in a twisted, warped way, she would have to then, not that this would be true, but I think the direction that her mindset would lead her to, the conclusion that she would have, is that I am worthless. If I accept that I made a mistake that day, and it's because anytime I try, that is what's going to happen, then everybody was always right. I shouldn't belong. I shouldn't be here. I don't matter. I think that's what it comes down to. I don't matter, and I don't matter to anyone else. Everybody was right. I am worthless. I have no value. And that is a terrible position for anybody to be in mentally and emotionally. And so I think for her, it makes more sense to continuously try to prove that she is worthwhile and to continuously establish a pattern where the consequences ultimately are insignificant. As long as she can show, see, look, I can be really helpful to the cause. I can be really helpful to whatever it is you care about. It's not that she cares about whatever the cause is. It's that she just continuously wants to prove that I am worthwhile. And it's absolutely devastating because if she were to actually pull from all of what has happened and really take the time to dissect all of that, I think it would lead to tremendous pain. That pain, ultimately, if she could push through and she had guidance and she had people around her who loved her, I think they could help her see that, one, they were wrong and that she does have value and the words that were said to her were not true. I think if she could have that, as well as somebody telling her sometimes bad things happen, it's not your fault, then maybe there's hope. But when is there ever the time? And who is going to do that for her? Everybody, ultimately. If she's willing to try and her creations do at this point have a positive effect for their cause, then what reason do they have to ever actually encourage her to do that deep introspection? Speaking of, if only she could have good people around her, we finally do get a reunion between her and Vi. And I love Vi so much. And I wanted so badly for them to just reunite and then everything is okay and then that's that and that's where the show ends. I mean, you want that as far as because you just want everything to work out, but from a storytelling perspective, that would be a really weird place to end the show. I'm not literally saying I think that's where it should have ended, but you just want these characters to know some sense of peace, for the chaos to be quieted, and Vi has endured obviously significant abuse. She was imprisoned when she didn't really deserve to be, and she was clearly beaten, as you discover through Caitlin talking to the guard. All she wants, though, is to return to her sister, to apologize, to uplift her, to be there for her, and to have the reveal that Powder is now Jinx. And Savika, once again, being the person that just knows how to cut these two sisters apart, because when she tells Vi she's working for him, she's practically his daughter. And that's when Vi just breaks apart. But then you do get eventually Vi pushing through and reuniting with Jinx. And this moment is so devastating. One, there is that continued symbolism of the significance of Vi reaching out to Jinx. You see so many times in their childhood that Vi would sort of brush her cheek and have this very sisterly, sweet embrace in a sense. And then there was the time that broke all of those into something a lot darker, and it sort of warped that, because you see when she grabs her and then hits her that it now has sort of, it's made every interaction before something that Jinx likely can't really differentiate in her mind. It always now feels like a power imbalance between the two of them. But you see in this reunion, there is some restoration of that gesture when Vi reaches out to her. And it makes me so emotional when Jinx asks Vi, "Are you real?" And I think that up until this point, you are getting glimpses of where she is mentally and where she is deep down through how she behaves when she's alone, what she has done in what I'm going to kind of call her lair, and how she interacts, as I already touched on, with Silco, what her motivations are. You kind of are getting these glimpses. But I think this moment in particular really showcases how much she is stuck in her own mind and in her own memories to not even be able to differentiate that the person in front of her is real versus something of her imagination, a figment of her memories. And Vi is so gentle and so kind, and immediately there is sort of like this relief from both sisters in this moment, only for things to immediately get disrupted, and it just kind of contributes to the confusion that Jinx is feeling, because there's an enforcer who shows up, and then there's this thing that maybe they want, and maybe they're actually after this, and then the Firelight show up, and you're just wanting so badly for Vi and Jinx to be able to stay together, but they are once again ripped apart. What I think is extremely fascinating, though, and it just goes to show how clueless essentially everybody is in not just the upper city, but the council itself, is that when you see Caitlyn trying to actually break the case open, you could say, to be cliche, and she's investigating everything, when she goes to speak with Vi, I think it's so absurd that when Vi mentions Silco, who has been known to be somebody who has their fingers in so much within the Undercity since she was a kid, despite that, when she mentions Silco, you see Caitlyn's response being the industrialist, like shocked that like, oh, this person that runs a business is a bad guy, basically. And it's just amazing how much they are so unaware of who's actually calling the shots and profiting off of the people of the Undercity. Again, even though he has his own goals and a vision that is in some ways good, how he goes about it is having a negative impact, and they don't see it even a little bit. And they don't see it in part because Marcus obviously has done what he can to cover things up, and ultimately people in the council don't really care about the Undercity as long as they get their wine, is kind of the implication that you see with Mel when she's guiding Jace on how to manipulate people. But I think that just goes to show how much and how easy it is for everyday people to go on about their lives being completely unaware. They're knowledgeable of the fact that there are injustices and that some people are hurting and some people are suffering, but the reasons why are just these abstract concepts to them, and it's just sort of this is how things are. Part of what I really like in it being Caitlyn, who is the one that ultimately brings this knowledge to the upper city, is that she is a character that does have the potential to just sit comfortably in her wealth, in her privilege, in the prestige that her family has, and also in the fact that she has a lot of skills. She could very easily just be the guard who gets the comfortable jobs and is ultimately never in danger, but that's not enough for her. She does have a moral compass pointing north, and she is trying to do what she can. She is flawed, though. You see in her interactions, especially the very first interaction she has with Vi, where she says, "somebody like you," and she obviously has a view of people who live in the Undercity. But once her eyes are opened, she is very willing to recognize the roles in which the upper city has played in the things that have caused problems for the Undercity, and that she is somebody who is able to adapt and change, and she is willing to take the information she has and actually do the right thing with it. She is going to see that it's Silco who is the problem, and she's going to ensure that, unlike Marcus, she doesn't see a potential deal that she can make. She is in some ways immovable in that sense. She's not looking to gain from a broken system. She's looking to try and repair. And I think another great conundrum within this entire show is, do we repair what is already broken, or do we try to burn it all to the ground and start something new? An individual who does care so much about the well-being of all of Piltover is Heimerdinger. I think that Heimerdinger is a character who, his flaw is that he does sort of rely on his wisdom to dictate his decisions without ever actually elaborating on why he feels the way he feels. So he just comes across to younger generations, and I would say to humans, because you do hear that humans don't live as long as he does, you do see that he has a tendency to just tell people, no, don't do that, and then he doesn't provide further explanation, which is infuriating. So many of us have experienced that before, where somebody is basically like, well, because I said so, and there is this sort of underlying, and also I'm older and wiser, so just do what I say. And I think that it's frustrating in the moment when, for example, you do have, at the beginning of this batch of episodes, you have Victor trying to show, look at the technology, it's great, and he's like, another 10 years. And then you also have, and I'll get to Victor's diagnosis here, but you also have them realizing maybe we can do something with this magic to help cure Victor. But Heimerdinger just immediately is saying, no, destroy it, don't do anything with it. And he doesn't really elaborate on that, which you can imagine is then not going to go over well. And when has it ever? Because at the very beginning, Heimerdinger warned Jace, don't say anything about magic and the arcane. And then Jace didn't listen to that at all. And then Jace was ultimately rewarded for that. You see, he got to sneak into the lab. He got to work on things more. And this is sort of a recurring pattern of Heimerdinger trying to give this sage advice and it not being taken seriously. And at this point, Jace sees Heimerdinger as an obstacle. Heimerdinger, I don't think, is an obstacle in the way that Jace views him. I think, if anything, the other council members who couldn't care less about most of society, they just care what they can get out of it and how to maintain their comfort. Jace doesn't see them as obstacles. He sees Heimerdinger as an obstacle instead of seeing him as somebody he can work with, even if at times they're at odds. And there's a moment where Heimerdinger is in the council. He's trying to say, we need to do better. We need to be better. And Jace just immediately starts to shut down what he's saying. And Heimerdinger recognizes immediately, this is because I'm telling you to destroy the work that you've done that might help your friend. And let's have a conversation about this later, basically. But Jace refuses to listen to this, and he does encourage that they push him out. This scene is devastating in many ways, but also because Heimerdinger, they could not have given him a sadder expression, but also a compliment to just the way in which the show, the level of detail that they place within everything. So the way in which they utilize the rule of thirds, which is somewhat of a, I'm not an expert in videography and photography or anything like that, but generally speaking, a lot of times you want to play off of the thirds in the way in which something is laid out. So in a photograph, you might have somebody that's off to the side slightly, in the middle, or the other side, and you do kind of use that to try and make sure that the viewer is looking at something in a way that is interesting, creative, captivating. A lot of times shots that feel weird or you don't know where to focus is because they're not quite utilizing the rule of thirds very well. And they utilize it exceptionally in this scene, because you have Jace, when you go to him in this moment, when he's advocating for getting rid of Heimerdinger, he's front and center. And then Heimerdinger, when they show him, he's off to the side. And I think symbolically, they have tied what is happening to the placement within the rule of thirds. So the idea being that Jace is becoming more of the focus, and he's kind of becoming almost the person who is having the most control over the council in a way, and Heimerdinger is literally being pushed out. So the fact that he's kind of off to the side and Jace is front and center, I just think is a wonderful detail that they used here. I did say that we would get around to Victor, so we'll go ahead and do that now. Victor and Vi are my two favorites. I think everybody is phenomenally written, but these two are my favorite characters, so we're saving the best for last, in my opinion. But Victor is a character that within the deep dive I did for the first 3 episodes, I said that he is a great example of a trope that I can't talk about just yet, because I am doing a watch through. For me, this is a rewatch, but I know for some people this might be the first time they're watching it, so I don't want to reveal anything about any of the characters beyond the batch of episodes I am discussing. So in the first 3 episodes, the trope that I was talking about is the idea of this almost like mad scientist. And I don't think by any means Victor comes across within how he's portrayed in Arcane as ever being this evil person who's just trying to use magic and technology to their advantage. That's not at all how he comes across, which is why he's that trope done very differently, but very well, because he is somebody who has very personal reasons why he wants to use the technology for himself, is that he's dying. He's always also been physically impacted by his environment. It's very unfair, but he's trying to do not only what he can to help himself, but you do see time and time again that he also wants to help those around him. He has not forgotten what life was like. There is a part where he tells the other characters there are people who need this now, and he's part of the reason why Jace does flip-flop back and forth between wanting to listen to Heimerdinger's advice and then wanting also to be on Victor's side. And you do see legacy being something that they discuss. Heimerdinger tells him those who shine brightest often burn the fastest, which is so extremely devastating. It's not necessarily the most comforting thing, but I think in a way it's meant to say that you are so exceptional and you are such a remarkable part of our society. You've done so much. But Victor does have a very human reaction, which is that I'm just going to be a footnote in all of this, which I think you also see realized through the way in which people see Jace as the golden boy, and they pretty much always forget that Victor even exists. In a lot of ways, he is just sort of seen as this extension of Jace. He's in Jace's shadow, even though a lot of the accomplishments they've made together, or in a large part because of Victor. And you can absolutely understand. I don't think there are too many people ever that would look at Victor's situation and say like, well, he should probably just not try to use the technology he has to save himself because it might be dangerous. I mean, I don't think too many people, it's not like the decision in front of him is, what if you harm a lot of people, but then you get to survive? It's not that sort of situation. It's maybe there's a negative side of this, but maybe it's worth it in the end if it means that you can save yourself. And also he's a brilliant mind, so if he saves himself, he might be able to also save a lot of other people too. Victor, I think, very much is a character who's willing to put himself in danger because he doesn't really feel he has a whole lot to lose at this point. And I think that's where his line has always been, I'm willing to put myself in danger, but I'm not going to put other people in danger. But then just as a character, when you get that brief flashback of him as a child, which I can't say just yet why this flashback is so incredibly devastating because it ties to something in the next batch of episodes. But if you do want to see a deep dive into just the opening of episode 6 versus something else that transpires, then I will have my deep dive of that scene alone in the description bar because, oh my gosh, and when we get to it in the next batch of episodes, I'm probably going to get emotional all over again. I wrote in my notes for that scene, as soon as it came up, I wrote, no, not this opening, with a crying face, because him trying to keep up with the boat, it just kind of shows, just alone in this, without even talking about anything else that transpires, this scene in isolation, also, it just shows the way in which the boat is sort of representing what he is capable of within his mind and his innovation, but his physical self cannot keep up with that. And I think it's something that he has grappled with for so long. And then, of course, though, this does lead him to this mysterious figure who you have seen sort of around Silco, and you see this being seems to be caring for this creature. So there's a lot going on with that. But as far as Victor's character goes, I think that even though he doesn't get the most amount of screen time, he is one of the most compelling, devastating, tragic, and interesting characters within the whole show. I am very curious to see. There's a part when he's been kind of working himself to exhaustion, and he's sitting and he's kind of got his arm up in a certain way. And the way that it's shaped, the sort of silhouette that it makes, it does look similar, in my opinion, to how some of the individuals look once they've had a lot of shimmer. And I am very curious to see how maybe that might be representative of things to come. Now getting around to Vi, I did sort of intentionally follow in the footsteps of the show, where all of episode 4 you're kind of like, where's Vi? Where's Vi? So I wanted to save discussing Vi and her character within this act for the end. Vi is a character that I think very interestingly, for so long, she did represent sort of that fight, and Vander was trying to contain that to some degree, or at least ensure that she didn't just think with her gut and that she actually sort of stopped and reflected on things. And you see her trying to do the right thing. She's trying to do the right thing within a flawed system, which does end up negatively impacting her pretty much more than anything else. Her doing the quote-unquote right thing resulted in nothing good. And what I think is interesting in comparing her with her sister, Jinx was so determined to prove herself when she was Powder. And she tried so hard, and then there was this act that resulted in something really negative happening. And then with Vi, something similar that I think kind of gets overlooked actually occurred. Vi tried to do the right thing. She tried to turn herself in. That was what she saw as the noble thing to do. And she tried to do this right thing, and then something terrible happened. And in a way, it's more obvious when we see it through Jinx, because Jinx accidentally, through the thing that she created, killed people that she cared about. In a lot of ways, Vi taking this step, it creates more distance between the fact that people died, but Benzo died, and in a way, it was almost like by her bringing the enforcers in, inviting them in, you could say, even though it was ultimately Silco who was responsible for Benzo, I still think that Benzo, he died, and then Vander, you see negative things happening to him, and then you see her friends dying, and it's very easy, I think, to have Vi look at other people and be like, oh, because of Silco, it's all coming down to Silco. And in the past, Vi's biggest issue often was really coming down to the enforcers and the us versus them mentality that was instilled in her. And as she says before, I've grown up knowing I'm less than them. Now it's Silco. And it's like her broader view of things has narrowed down to just Silco bad. I have to help my sister. And that's sort of it. Jinx, I was saying earlier, doesn't come across like she cares about the cause pretty much at all. At this point, she's still just trying to have her own motivations propel her. And then with Vi used to care so much about the cause. And then now she just wants to help her sister because she couldn't before. It's like she's trying to right the wrong. And in a way, I think they're actually mirroring each other a lot. But what's interesting is that Vi, who was somebody who was always for the cause of helping the people of Zon, I don't know that she cares all that much in this moment because she's so determined to get to her sister. Whereas I think in a way, Jinx, who's never cared about the cause really, is sort of becoming this symbol of it. Oftentimes, people's motivations are not even ultimately what is seen. It's just the end result that's seen. It's what really, I think, ties so much of what I've been trying to capture within this discussion as far as Jace, Mel, Heimerdinger even, Silco, so much of what the characters do, what they actually want versus the actions that they have and their consequences and how that plays out. I just think all of that is done phenomenally within this show. I also think there are some indications that Vi's trauma has affected her, maybe not to the same degree as Jinx's trauma, but we do see that when she is injured, she starts hallucinating. I think it's very easy to just decide, oh, well, she's lost a lot of blood, she's weak, she's probably just hallucinating because of that. But I do wonder if some of the ways in which she hallucinates are actually rooted in similar things to what causes Jinx to hallucinate, because you directly are seeing that when she's hallucinating, she sees her little sister and her mom. For a second, when she looks at Caitlyn, she actually is seeing her mother in that instance. And it's kind of indicative of the fact that the moment that somebody is providing care to her, she kind of reverts back to being a child and wanting to see her mom caring for her, because Vi has had to be an adult from far too young of an age, and she's taken on so much so early, and I think there's this enormous burden on her, and she kind of can't help but hear Vander. That's another thing. She does often hear Vander trying to guide her, and then now in this moment where she's hallucinating, it's like I have to push on because mom's not here. The last time I remember being cared for in this way was from my mother, but I think also there is an additional layer of my mother would have wanted me to look out for my sister, so then she kind of has to persevere through the pain and what she's going through, and she is kind of constantly like a bulldozer. I noted at the end of last week, I was talking about Huck, this character who within this first season is basically a nobody, but this just goes to show how good Arcane is. I think that somebody who has barely any screen time ended up having one of the most heartbreaking moments, because you see within the first batch of episodes when you're introduced to the last drop, which how sad to see how that has turned out. But you see Huck go to get some drinks from Vander. I mentioned that the look on his face, he seems very much attached to the substance that he's about to consume, which doesn't really mean much of anything. A lot of us get excited about something we're about to eat or drink before we do, because if you're hungry or thirsty, it's natural. But when you look back at that moment in retrospect, you're like, oh, he maybe already had some inclinations towards substance abuse. And additionally, you see the way that he is being cheated out of this deal that he absolutely was upholding his end of the bargain from, and it's Vander, this big strong person, who is able to help him out, and it was like this constant, he can't ever help himself. So when you see him, that he sold Vi out, despite the fact that he obviously cares about her and that he wanted to help her, but he did it because he really wanted more shimmer, and just this line of like, I was tired of nobody ever fearing me, basically. It's so devastating, and just to see that that's what he's not really himself. And it's a very small thing because it's not really the focus of the show, but truly so often when people are struggling with substance abuse, they make decisions that aren't really them. And you see that play out with this character just in the brief amount of time that they have on the screen. It is a result, however, of his actions that led to this sort of face-off between Silco and Vi. And there is this wonderful reunion that I touched on before, but also devastating, and it's just so heartbreaking to see how it plays out. But this is because Jinx ultimately lights the thing that she was told, if ever you need me, just use this and I'll come. And so that's what Vi sees, what she remembers. She returns to Jinx, and then this gets disrupted, and that's where we leave off. This show is just fantastic. I will probably end up saying that multiple times every discussion I do, so apologies, but I love it. I think it's great, and I'm really enjoying getting to chat through why I think that is the case. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.